I thank the Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague from Arizona. I didn't get a chance to get down here in time during the time that was set aside to honor her service, but I'm glad I was down here and able to get down at the tail end of it to hear her speech. It's been an honor. We were classmates, came in together, served together, and I remember when the gentlelady told us that she wasn't running again. I found her on the floor and I said, "So what's going on? Why aren't you staying with us?" And she said, one word: family. And that's the right answer. But you've been a great patriot. Congress is far better for having had you in it, and we will miss you. But we know you won't be too far away, and we hope to see you here. But God bless you. Spend time with your family. I feel the pain of being away as you do, and I'll be very happy for you. But I'll give you a few floor speeches to watch every once in a while here, just for fun.
Thank you, Chip.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I come to the floor tonight because there's a lot of talk going on right now about what's been referred to as DOGE, this effort by our friends Elon and Vivek with respect to the Department of Government Efficiency. Not 100% clear yet what that looks like in terms of formality, how the incoming President Trump, plans to establish it, set it up. We had some great meetings today with those two men and members of Congress who are interested in facilitating their work. And my only problem with the name Department of Government Efficiency is I would prefer it to be the Department of Government Elimination. I think we'd be a lot better off if we were eliminating large swaths of that which has been unconstitutionally created to rack up $36 trillion of debt. But I think what it merits observation is what this body needs to do to actually deliver on what people are, I think, to some degree across the country, getting excited about with respect to the prospect of the brain power that's been assembled around this department, DOGE, or this effort, that Congress has to actually do our part. We had a meeting today, and there was a lot of conversation back and forth, and there was a whole lot of members of Congress who were looking to them to say, please do this. One member said, please help give us the fortitude, the spine, to be able to deliver on removing and cutting this waste in government. Now, look, to be very clear, the use of technology, crowdsourcing, AI by these guys, other smart people around the country, the use of technology, observe it, figure out what to do with it, great. I'm for it. And I support their efforts. I support efforts by the incoming president, his staff, his administration to, frankly, massively slash and burn the bureaucracy that is sucking away, frankly, the life of the American people through overregulation and overspending and driving up inflation because we keep spending more and more money in this vast bureaucracy that you can't even keep up with. I have a bill that I introduced a few years ago, count the crimes. You know why? Nobody can tell me how many crimes there are. Literally, nobody can tell me how many crimes there are in the federal government. Does anybody see that as a problem? We literally don't even know how many. Forget, cataloging them all, organizing them all, figuring out how much of them are repeated or overburdensome or perhaps out of line. We don't even know. And I can't even get that bill through the committee and down to the floor. What, members of the body don't want to know how many crimes there are so we can maybe go observe and try to do something about it? On this score is where I believe Elon and Vivek can add massive value. They don't necessarily need us to pass something to go count the crimes. They can just use technology, AI, crowdsourcing, work, and put a whole lot of effort into doing that. Because frankly, a lot of people don't understand this. We're pretty short-staffed here as it relates to our offices on Capitol Hill, dealing with constituent services, dealing with the stuff we deal with all the time. So having an army of people and being able to leverage that is going to be really important. But now let's cut to the chase. The fact of the matter is, Too many members of the United States Congress are all too excited to hide behind Elon and Vivek to do the work they're supposed to do. That's the truth. I saw colleagues go into the mic thanking them, oh, please save us from the scourge of bureaucracy. Well, what the hell is our job? We actually do have separation of powers. We actually are Article 1. We actually do have the ability to use the power of the purse to constrain the Leviathan and the executive branch. We just never do it, ever. And if we dare try, oh, the scorn, oh, the look from your colleagues when you dare come down and object to a consent request, as I did for $19 billion, seems trivial now, doesn't it? $19 billion in 2019 for Hurricane Harvey relief, predominantly, heavily in my home state of Texas. Unanimous consent request was being offered on the floor. I was at the airport. I got word they're going to do this by consent. I said, wait a minute. They're going to pass $19 billion by unanimous consent on the floor of the House and we're not there and it's not paid for? Well, it might be meritorious in some respects. I don't know. I'd have to look at the funding and what it's going to be used for in Texas. There are people hurting in Texas, but we got to pay for it. And we certainly don't pass things by $19 billion by consent. I got in my car. I canceled the flight. I got in a car, an Uber, came back here to the Hill, and I ran down on the floor, and I objected. And you know what happened back in Texas? The usual suspects, the newspapers, the editorial boards, the people that like to have wailing and gnashing of teeth, and the, wine-sipping crowds of the elites in the cities in Austin, they were like, oh, you're the devil. This is horrible. How could you do this? But a funny thing happened. This is my message to my colleagues. A funny thing happened. My constituents, even those, now again, my district wasn't as directly impacted by Harvey, fair. But my constituents and other people around the state of Texas took notice that maybe if a member of Congress says there ought to be some principles that guide what we do, and there's a right way to do things, that maybe our country would be better off. Maybe we wouldn't have $36 trillion of debt. So I would mention right now, in that very same context, we are currently considering a disaster supplemental bill again. Every year we consider some sort of disaster supplemental bill. Why? Because the world has events. They have always had events. Galveston was hit at the turn of the last century. It was wiped out. There have been floods. There have been fires. There's been constant issues, tornadoes. And this isn't all related to climate change. It's just over the course of history of mankind. In fact, our use of technology makes us be able to manage those better. Our use of energy. We can manage that better by abundant, reliable energy. But what happens is, every year, there's something that strikes at our heart. Katrina in 2005, Ike, Harvey, what happened in Hawaii. Go down the list of things that we care. We're in a massive drought in Texas, massive drought. We've got all sorts of different things that pop up. And so here we are, and we have $113 billion that has been put forward from the administration under the name of disaster relief. Now, there are all manners of things in that bill, and we're looking at those things. Replenish the disaster relief fund, what we call the DERF, $40 billion, $16 billion for some stuff on defense, another pot of money for farmers who've had issues across the country related to disaster and otherwise. And go down the list to the tune of $111 or $13 billion. It's not paid for. It's just another check writing exercise. But it's the writing of a check by printing of money, because that's what we do. There is no limiting principle. My question for anybody watching this, what do you think the limiting principle ought to be for the elected representatives you send here to represent you? Is it, well, man, that's a really sympathetic thing, write the check? Is that our limiting principle? Chip, there are people hurting in North Carolina. Yes, I know. I pray for them. We try to support organizations like Samaritan's Purse and others that help. I've had colleagues at Corey Mills that went in early trying to deal with the disaster relief. But the last time I checked, the state of North Carolina is not a third world country that has no resources or abilities. They're a very robust economy, a very strong state. Are they unable to issue bonds? Are they unable to find ways to come up with their own dollars to build their own infrastructure and rebuild? State of Texas, when we have a calamity. The state of Texas is literally the 8th biggest economy in the world. The world. Just Texas is the 8th largest economy in the world. Other than immediate disaster relief using the resources of the National Guard or the resources at FEMA, when you have an actual emergency where you've got to move people, help them, deal with being in floods and what, we all help each other out. Send the resources. Yes, governors, go help. But we're now a month later, 2 months later. Why is the state of Texas not able to deal with the disaster? Are we unable to deal with it? I mean, we have almost I think, $400 billion biennial budget, i.e., roughly $200 billion a year budget in Texas. So are we not, at least Texas, the 8th largest economy, are we not able to deal with disasters? I think we can. I think most states in this country can. I think most of us can do what we need to do. The federal government doesn't need to be an ATM, but that's what we're turning it into. If there isn't a limiting principle on printing money, then how can DOGE be successful? Someone explain to me how all of the efforts by Elon, all of the efforts by Vivek, all of the efforts of the incoming Office of Management and Budget and President Trump, if this body, if this Congress, if this Republican majority does nothing but do the same old thing we've always done, which is come down here and write checks that have no backing, they're literally the Fed just printing money. How can we possibly limit the size, scope, and growth of the federal government? In other words, look in the mirror. Don't look for a fiscal savior. Don't look for salvation for the future of the country's well-being with some folks over in the executive branch or who are friends with the executive branch who are going to provide us great information. Be grateful for it. But remember, when we go through the appropriations process, it's our job. They can make the executive branch more efficient, yes. But we're the ones who create these departments, create these programs. We're supposed to authorize them. We don't. The Department of Homeland Security was created over 20 years ago. We've never reauthorized it. It's insane. 200 and something thousand employees, the Department of Homeland Security. We've never reauthorized it. That's our job. But all we do is sit around and shrug our shoulders and say, well, man, have you been to the mountains in western North Carolina? It's just awful. We have to write that check. Okay, well, what if I say, okay, fine. Okay, God bless these awesome Americans. They need assistance. Yeah, all right, fine. You don't have to pay for it. Write the check. Well, then what? Do we write the next check? Do we just keep printing money for everybody's illness? Do you know right now under FEMA, we're using FEMA emergency dollars to pay for COVID-related burials. Why? Why? Because somebody declared an emergency at some point. The administration was given large pots of money, and now everybody just shrugs and walks away. Look, the fact of the matter is President Trump, was elected in today's time, you could describe as a landslide. In today's divided world, with what we call the trifecta. Republicans will control the House, Republicans will control the Senate. Pretty thin majorities in both chambers. The question will be for Republicans is, what are we going to do? Will we deliver? And I would suggest to you that we're not going to truly deliver unless at least two things are true. And I think there's 3, 4, 5. But at least two things are true. One, we fully secure the border and undo the damage caused by the open borders of the last 4+ years. And two, we stop spending money we don't have. If we can't do those two things, we won't have a country left. I'm not sitting here telling you that I think we can balance the $2 trillion deficit in 1 year. I think that would be difficult to continue to have economic growth and do what we need to do. But I am telling you that we need to actually be serious. Because I would say to my fellow Republicans, I've said we need to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, which is subsidizing Chinese wind and solar. It is now putting American companies on the hook, and they wanting to take, get the big drug high of more money and more subsidies. And we're now turning us away from what is the strength of the reliable American oil and gas industry. We are driving up the cost of goods, driving up inflation, all under the Inflation Reduction Act. So my view is, and the view of most Americans, and I promise you virtually everybody in this chamber, not all, ran on repealing the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, ending those subsidies, returning to market forces, determining the best reliable energy, and importantly, stop spending money we don't have for the subsidies to enrich the Chinese, enrich our enemies, and undermine our own well-being. A handful of my colleagues have signed a letter saying they don't want to do that. Let me just posit, what if I am successful? What if we are successful and we repeal it? What have we done? We've returned to the status quo of 2022. So basically, on that issue, I am begging to return to the halcyon days of old in 2022, when everything was great. Deficits were great. Everything was wonderful. I'm being sarcastic. So if I'm successful and I fight and I struggle for all the people who don't want to tell their big corporations no, who are now hooked on the subsidies, because that's what's going to happen, including in Texas. I'm looking at you, Texas. All your big oil and gas companies, they're getting on the hook because they like free money. It ain't free, by the way, but they like subsidies they can turn into current day profits at the expense of your children's future, because they don't care. Because they'll get a good earnings report and they'll make money now. But the debt will keep going up and the dollar will keep getting weakened and inflation will keep being real. So if we can do it, if we can repeal it, if we're successful, all we do is rewind the clock to 2022. If we return to pre-COVID spending, all you do is return the clock to 2020. That would basically save us a couple $100 billion a year. Repealing the so-called Inflation Reduction Act and ending those subsidies would save us, probably about $70 billion a year over 10 years. What if we secure the border tomorrow? Now, mind you, secure the border, even under President Trump, meant we had 30,000 or so a month still coming across the border. But let's just say we secure the border. All right, now what are we doing with the, 10 million people or so that are now in our country that weren't? Okay, let's repatriate them. Okay, how many will we repatriate? We'd have to repatriate them all just to return to the status quo. My point of all this is, if you want to transform the country, we need transformative policies, and you need a Congress willing to do it. You need a Congress willing to actually deliver on what they said they would do. And look, this is a refrain that I've offered in a number of speeches here on the floor of the House. They're not always that well received. When I gave a speech saying, name one thing, some of my colleagues got a little mad. As I said, the best way to do that is do the thing. Deliver. But we're $36 trillion in debt. If we do everything I just said, and if we renew the Trump tax cuts from 2017, we extend them, so that everybody's taxes can, again, I'm going back to my point, go to the status quo. If we do all of those things, our debt, we will be struggling just to get to deficit neutrality on the issue, meaning we'll still be at $2 trillion of debt a year. Now, if Elon and Vivek and company go find a bunch of waste and we can cut that out and then we can use that to either bring back savings or maybe cut down on the bureaucracy or take that money and use it for additional things that would be better, say at the Pentagon, okay, that's great. Maybe we'll save a little bit. But if you save 30% of our discretionary budget, let's say they go hack out just mountains of waste, fire bureaucrats, and a third, 33% of the discretionary budget just goes away, poof. Well, that's about $600 billion. We're running about a $2 trillion deficit. I'm just trying to put this in perspective. I'm for that. You know why I'm for it? Fire the bureaucrats, end the weaponization, end the waste, end the people who are targeting us. Make them have to go out and get a real job. I'm for all of those things, and our country would be better off. And if we do it, we will then earn the right to deal with mandatory spending. But I've had some of my colleagues, I said today in a meeting with our colleagues when Vivek and Elon were here, and I pointed out that we got a $113 billion bill on the floor for the disaster supplemental. I'm pointing out that it's not going to be paid for. I'm pointing out it's going to continue to perpetuate waste like a bike path in Alaska, COVID spending across the country, I think a church parking lot in Vermont. I mean, I can just go down a laundry list of things that your current FEMA emergency funding is being used for. And we're going to just throw another $40 billion at it after we've been criticizing FEMA all through the fall about how incompetent they are, how bad they are. We're going to say, you know what your reward is? Here's some more money. Keep doing your bureaucratic thing. Don't worry, Elon and Vivek will save us, because we sure as hell aren't going to save us. That's what we do. And so my perspective is we should look in the mirror. We should do our job. Constrain that spending. Don't give it to the bureaucrats. Do our part. Find the savings. Do what we can do to make it work. But you know what my colleague said? My colleague said, well, Chip, the discretionary spending doesn't matter because of the point I said a minute ago. If you cut a third of it, you save $600 billion. You still have a $2 trillion deficit. Why? Because we've made promises for at least half a century on Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid and increasingly on veterans benefits that we can't keep up with. And Republicans go around and pounding their chest on tax policy. We will cut taxes, so we'll create economic growth, and we'll bring in revenue, and we'll ignore the deficits. I'm for the tax cuts, but if you're not doing the spending cuts, you end up with $36 trillion of debt. Republicans need to look in the mirror. And if my colleagues think we're going to just waltz into a reconciliation debate in January, and it's all going to be kumbaya because K Street wants tax cuts, and because certain people think that they're going to get their bread buttered, but we're not going to focus on deficits, I would just suggest that maybe they think long and hard about the calendar that the House put out, whereby we are only here 3 days a week, 3 weeks a month. And maybe we should follow the Senate calendar, which, to his great credit, the incoming leader put out 5 days a week, every week for the first 3 months of the year. We were elected to do something different. And by goodness, we're going to do something different. We must. We have no choice. Failure is not an option. And I'll just make one other point in closing here as we deal with all that and on the spending issue. I watch the Senate Republicans doing this dance of hand-wringing and concern about the president's nominees. The president was elected by the American people to change this town. He has nominated people who want to change this town. If you want to go overturn every rock of everybody's past and then say that they are not capable or they don't deserve to serve in a position like Secretary of Defense, as is currently occurring with the targeted attacks on Pete Hegseth, Well, maybe you should take the board out of your eye. I'm not saying that we don't have standards that are appropriate in the advise and consent process. We do and we should. I'm a believer in that, in separation of powers. But the president also is deserving of the courtesy and the respect of his own party in particular, of the individuals he's nominating to change the town. He was elected to change it. You don't like Tulsi because she's a Democrat? Get over it. She's not anymore. She's a Republican now, but she was. In this chamber, I served with her. She was a Democrat. You don't like Bobby Kennedy because he's from the iconic Democrat family? Get over it. I don't agree with Bobby Kennedy on a lot of different things, but I agree with him that we need to fundamentally change our healthcare system, that we need to make America healthy again. I agree with Tulsi that we've been involved in endless wars and endless conflict that is draining our resources and undermining the men and women in uniform. I agree with Pete Hegseth that wokeism is destroying the United States military. I agree with Pete that we don't need to have endless wars. I agree with Pete that we ought to have somebody who's served in battle and understands it, who's at the top of the Pentagon, rather than the brass who, frankly, often like their ribbons more than actually doing the work that is necessary to defend this country. I like the fact that we have people that the president is nominating that will take on the establishment and take on, for example, the FBI with Kash Patel. And the fact of the matter is we have senators who are wanting to challenge it. For example, the senator from Iowa who's going after Pete Hegseth, or seemingly being critical. Same individual, by the way, says and voted for an NDAA that would draft our daughters and has been fighting to draft our daughters. And I tell her, you'll do that over my dead body. There will be no draft of my daughter. Voted for the Marriage Act to codify gay marriage. Went out to her constituents and talked about how the horrible Senate border bill was somehow a good bill and then scolded President Trump for opposing it. Voted for Garland for AG, voted for Lloyd Austin for defense, voted for Buttigieg for DOT, voted for Janet Yellen, voted for Ukraine's borders over America's borders. And with all due respect to the senator from Iowa, you're not where the American people are. President Trump is. And Pete Hegseth is. We have an obligation to change this town or we're going to lose this country. If Republicans do not deliver, if we do not do what we said we would do, this party will end. There will not be a Republican Party if we fail in this term, this Congress, to deliver. That's not hyperbole. It's true. We will go the way of the Whigs. We will secure the border. We will return order to our streets. We will cut spending. We will move towards balancing our budgets. We will nominate and confirm, as the president has nominated, we will confirm people who will change this town, take on the bureaucracy. We will listen to and work with Elon and Vivek, root out the waste and fraud, but do it ourselves. Pass bills that actually get the job done. We will undo the damage of the Biden administration, replace it with a legacy that our kids and grandkids can be proud of. Root out the wokeism, root out all of the DEI and the critical race theory. Kill it now. We will do these things or we will not exist. And we will organize ourselves as a conference to do those things or we won't succeed. Our job between now, the first week of December, and the first week of January is to get our heads in the right places. They currently aren't there. We are not structured right now to deliver, and we have 1 month to do it. That is my calling. We are not here to take breaks. We are not here for Codels. We are not here for trips. We are here to get the job done. With that, I yield back.